On Friday, Colombian indigenous people from the MISAC community tore down a statue of the colonialist founder of Bogotá, Gonzalo Jiménez de Quesada, in the capital, as anti-government protests continue for the 10th day. In commemoration of the International Quds Day, Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei rejected deals between some Arab countries and the Israeli regime aimed at undermining Muslim unity. The Scottish National Party has won 38 of the first 47 seats declared so far in the parliamentary election, as the party hopes to secure a majority solid enough to call for a new referendum on independence. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. This Friday, Colombian indigenous people from the MISAC community tore down a statue of the colonialist founder of Bogotá, Gonzalo Jiménez de Quesada, in the capital. The monument was installed in the square of the University of Rosario, only 3 blocks away from the Casa de Nariño, the presidential headquarters. Indigenous communities have been taking part in the national strike action across the country for the past 10 days. On April 28th, at the beginning of the national demonstrations, they tore down the statue of colonialist Sebastián de Belalcázar in Cali. On that occasion, indigenous leader Pedro Velasco, governor of the MISAC community, expressed that these monuments are a colonialist reminder against the historical memory of indigenous peoples. The MISAC people, one of the indigenous communities of pre-colonial Colombia, were almost completely massacred during Spanish colonization. Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez denounced the massacre conducted by the Colombian government as security forces violently repress hundreds of thousands of Colombians who've been protesting for the past 10 days against the government of President Iván Duque. What began as a national mobilization to reject a regressive tax reform has become one of the largest demonstrations the country has seen, with at least 37 people killed and hundreds more injured.
The community is stunned by the massacre that is taking place in Colombia and against the sisterly people of Colombia. From here, our solidarity to the sisterly people of Colombia who are being massacred. I have not seen Secretary General of Organization of American States Luis Almagro in Colombia at this moment when the people of Colombia are being massacred.
Dozens gathered outside the Colombian consulate in the Venezuelan capital Caracas to protest the brutal state violence against anti-government protesters in Colombia.
We have to make it clear that we understand the motives of the Colombian mobilization and that we know that it is not a protest led by terrorist organizations, as the Colombian government pretends to make it look. It is the Colombian people who are desperate and who are looking for alternatives to a tax reform that was precisely going to squeeze their pockets.
On Friday, Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador and US Vice President Kamala Harris met virtually to address migration issues. Ahead of the meeting, the Mexican president accused the US of meddling in Mexico's internal affairs. López Obrador revealed tax records of payments from the US government to a local anti-corruption watchdog, which he said was working against his administration. Meanwhile, in the virtual meeting, Harris stated that it is in Washington and Mexico's mutual interest to provide immediate relief to the so-called Northern Triangle, formed by Guatemala, Honduras and El Salvador, to reduce migration. The triangle has been long plagued by social unrest, poverty, violence and corruption, partially attributable to centuries of US meddling in the region's affairs. The crisis has caused many people from these countries to flee in search of a better life. For his part, the Mexican president said the US could count on his country's help in matters of migration. On Friday, United Nations human rights spokesperson Marta Hurdal called for an independent investigation into the deaths of 25 people during a police raid of a favela in the Brazilian city of Rio de Janeiro.
Deeply disturbed by the death of at least 25 people in a police operation in the Jacarazinho neighborhood in Rio de Janeiro yesterday, May 6. This appeared to have been the deadliest operation in more than a decade in Rio de Janeiro, and reinforces an old trend of unnecessary and disproportionate use of force by the police in Brazil's poor, marginalized and predominantly Afro-Brazilian neighborhoods known as favelas. We remind the Brazilian authorities that the use of force should be applied only when strictly necessary. Lethal force should be used as a last resort and only in cases where there is an imminent threat to life or serious injury. We ask the prosecutor to conduct an independent, complete and impartial investigation of this incident in accordance with international standards, in particular the Minnesota Protocol on the investigation of potentially illegal death.
On Friday, police in the Maldives informed that an explosion that wounded former President Mohamed Nasheed and 4 others was an act of terror, and they were attempting to identify 4 possible suspects. The current Speaker of Parliament was wounded in the blast outside his home on Thursday night as he was about to get into his car. Local media reported that a homemade explosive device was planted on a motorbike that was parked nearby. The hospital treating the former president said he had suffered multiple injuries but was in a stable condition. 4 other people are reported to have been injured, including Nasheed's bodyguards and bystanders. A team from the Australian Federal Police Force will travel to the Maldives to help in the investigation. Current President Ibrahim Solih described the explosion as an attack on Maldives' democracy and economy.
For the service is currently investigating the act of terror targeting the Speaker of Parliament, former President Mohamed Nasheed, which occurred on 6th May in Nilofer Hingung as an urgent priority. MPS, the Maldives Police Service, received information of this attack at 20:36 hours on the 6th of May 2021. At approximately 20:38 hours, police first responders attended the scene and immediately initiated investigative protocols. All necessary resources available for investigation and forensic teams are being utilized to aid in this purpose.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. In commemoration of International Quds Day, Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei rejected deals between some Arab countries and the Israeli regime aimed at undermining Muslim unity.
The failed deal of the Century Plan, and then the attempts to normalize the occupied regime's relations with some weak Arab governments, are cowardly efforts to run from the nightmare of Muslim unity. I say this decisively. These attempts will reach nowhere. The downward movement and decline of the enemy Zionist regime has begun and will not stop.
Every last Friday of the Islamic holy month of Ramadan marks International Quds Day, established by Iran in 1979 to express support for the Palestinians and oppose Zionism and the Israeli occupation. To commemorate Al-Quds Day is to keep in mind that the criminal alliance between imperialism and Zionism prevents the realization of the delayed Palestinian state, makes impossible the freedom of millions of human beings who suffer daily harassment, the demolition of their homes, the destruction of their crops, the segregation of their towns and villages by a wall over 700 kilometers long, the prohibition to move freely through their territory with the installation of 1,500 military checkpoints, and the impediment to return to their homes of millions of Palestinians. Quds Day protests have been held in parts of the Middle East and in several European cities, as well as the United States. In 2020, for the first time, the Quds Day event was held virtually in Iran amid the COVID-19 pandemic. And as International Quds Day is observed by supporters of Palestine across the world, our correspondent Hisham Wanas brings us the latest information regarding events in the occupied city of Jerusalem.
Greetings, dear viewers. Indeed, the protests continue in the neighborhood of Sha'ar Chesem, in the occupied city of Jerusalem, where residents of this neighborhood have refused to leave their homes and opposed to the decision of Israeli settlers to build a colony, a new Israeli colony where their homes are located. In this framework, it should be pointed out that the residents of this neighborhood are facing the attacks of Israeli settlers, who use firearms, pepper spray, rubber bullets and tear gas bombs, causing injuries, while Israeli forces are also following the policy of arbitrary arrests and assassinations to force residents to leave their homes and therefore build a new colony that divides the Arab neighborhoods in the holy city of Jerusalem. These confrontations have been condemned by Palestinians around the world and actually coincide with the International Al-Quds Day, which happens to be today, Friday, May the 7th, the last Friday of the month of Ramadan, or the Muslim month of fasting. Palestinians who carried out a mass prayer in the Al-Aqsa Mosque headed towards the Sha'ar Chesem neighborhood to show their solidarity with the residents, despite the fact that Israeli occupation troops have transformed the area into a military compound, with thousands of troops positioned at all points and entrances of the city to prevent the congregation from celebrating this International Al-Quds Day in Jerusalem. It should be noted that demonstrations and celebrations also took place in the West Bank, Gaza, and other occupied Palestinian territories, as well as countries around the world such as Syria, Iran, Iraq, Yemen, and others beyond the Middle East. All these nations, through these demonstrations, reaffirm their support to the just cause of the Palestinian people and to continue fighting until the occupied Palestinian territories are liberated and an independent Palestinian state is established, with Al-Quds as its capital. These nations also rejected the policies of the Israeli army towards the holy city of Al-Quds, oppression, forced displacement of its Palestinian residents, ethnic cleansing, the construction of new settlements and the destruction of the monuments of the holy city are among the strategies used. It should be noted that the struggle continues. Palestinians continue to gather inside and outside Palestine territories, as well as the resistance movements which ratify they have no other option but the armed struggle for the liberation of the Palestinian territories and to guarantee the preservation of the Arab-Palestinian identity in their eternal capital at Quds. This is all the information we have for now. Back to you in the studio.
And in the Yemeni capital Sana'a, there was also a rally to mark International Quds Day.
The message of the Yemenis today to the enemies is that the peoples are alive, they are aware, they have wisdom, and they realize the importance of the Palestinian cause, and their Israelis' games and lies will not sway the people because the Palestinian cause is in the blood of the Arabs and all Islamic people. Yemenis are here today despite the aggressions and siege and despite the difficult living conditions and the brutal aggressions from the Saudi coalition. They went out to confirm that the Palestinian cause is the first and the most central issue for the Yemeni people.
The Turkish Foreign Minister said he had discussed Israeli aggressions and the unfortunate events during the month of Ramadan during a meeting with his Palestinian counterpart in the Turkish capital Ankara on Friday.
We discussed the unfortunate events that took place in Jerusalem during Ramadan, as well as the Israeli aggression. Israel's policy of occupation in East Jerusalem and the West Bank unfortunately continued unabated during the month of Ramadan. We had the opportunity of assessing this today. We expect Israel to abandon these steps so as not to pave the way for greater instability in the future, and the restrictions in relation to Temple Mount must immediately come to an end. We expect respect toward our Palestinian brothers' freedom of worship. There is an attempt not only to apply time division at Al-Aqsa Mosque, but also to divide Al-Aqsa Mosque physically. These things should not be done. We must work to prevent it. And the Jerusalem vigilantes are defending Al-Aqsa Mosque on behalf of the Arab nation and the Islamic nation, and it is very important for those stationed in Jerusalem and the surroundings of Jerusalem and in Al-Aqsa Mosque to feel there is an expression of support for them by brothers in different countries, including Turkey. The attack that is currently taking place on the residents of the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood is a sinful attack that rises to the level of a crime against humanity, and therefore we have contacted the International Criminal Court and the Prosecutor General Fatou Bensouda to ask her to take a clear and strong position on this blatant attack by the occupation state, the State of Israel, against the innocent Palestinian citizens who have not sinned except that they live in the city of Jerusalem and they live in that neighborhood, the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood.
In Vienna, negotiations to revive the international deal on Iran's nuclear development are reaching the point of drafting an agreement. Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Saeed Abbas Araghchi said the goal is to bring the United States back to the deal and end US sanctions against Iran.
Today everyone resumed the talks with a new energy. What can be derived from the first session is the seriousness of all sides in reaching a solution and reviving the JCPOA. Our seriousness has been communicated at the meeting, and overall we have started the new round with a new positive energy and hope that we can reach a conclusion in the shortest time possible. We cannot predict the time, but hope that it can be done soon. Naturally, there are challenges, and the points we disagree on are not small and must be discussed and negotiated to reach a solution.
On Friday, Myanmar ethnic Karen guerrillas burnt down a military outpost, capturing it without a fight, according to the Karen National Liberation Army's Major General. Fighting between the Karen guerrillas and the Myanmar army has escalated since a military takeover in February, which overthrew the nation's elected civilian government. The Karen movement's armed wing has reportedly been training hundreds of young activists from the cities in the rudiments of guerrilla warfare. However, Myanmar military warplanes have launched around 30 attacks since the end of March, targeting Karen villages as well as positions held by the resistance movement, according to aid groups active in the area. An estimated 50,000 people have left their homes in recent weeks to escape the threat of the airstrikes. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. After crucial elections in Scotland on Thursday, the Scottish National Party is hopeful of securing a majority solid enough to call for a new referendum on independence. The party won 38 of the first 47 seats declared so far in the parliamentary election, including 3 of the election's key battlegrounds. However, in some areas there was an increase in support for opposition pro-union parties, indicating the final outcome would be very close, with some seats allocated on a separate proportional representation system. The SNP says it will seek to hold a new vote on succession by the end of 2023 if there is a pro-independence majority returned to the devolved 129-seat parliament, setting up a potential legal showdown with Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who says he will refuse any such vote. The results suggest the SNP is on course to win a 4th term in office, but if the party fails to win an outright majority, it will be easier for the British government to resist demands for another vote. And also in the United Kingdom, the Conservative Party secured a stunning victory in the town of Hartlepool after the first major election since Brexit and the coronavirus crisis. Hartlepool, a northern constituency deep in traditional Labour heartlands, which has never voted Conservative since its creation in 1974, saw a 16% swing to the Tories in the by-election. According to final results, the first to be announced after Thursday's local and regional elections, Conservative candidate Jill Mortimer won with over 15,500 votes, almost twice as many as her Labour opponent Paul Williams. The newly elected candidate described the victory as a historic result and a momentous day, all this happening in a high-stakes local election that could prove crucial for the unity of the United Kingdom. On Friday, French President Emmanuel Macron urged both the United States and the United Kingdom to stop blocking access to COVID-19 vaccines and their raw materials.
Anglo-Saxons block many of these ingredients and vaccines. Today, 100% of the vaccines produced in the United States are for the American market. In Europe, out of about 110 million produced to date, we have exported 45 million and kept 65 million. We are the most generous in the world today.
In Argentina, more and more sectors are joining the demand for pharmaceutical corporations to lift the patents of vaccines against COVID-19. Scientists from the South American country are promoting this international campaign. We have more details in the following report by our correspondent Carolina Silvestri.
At the G20 Leaders Summit held in November 2020, the Argentine president himself proposed declaring vaccines against the novel coronavirus a global public good.
Argentina is also committed to any regional or global initiative aimed at facilitating universal and equitable access to medicines, treatments and vaccines. Cooperation and solidarity are the two elements to fight against the pandemic. This fight is not only of governments, it is a collective responsibility of the international community that requires subscribing to a great pact of global solidarity.
For the researcher and specialist in international health and health policies at the National Scientific and Technical Research Council of Argentina, Marcela Velardo, the main obstacle to universal access to vaccines are the exclusive rights granted by patents.
They generate monopolies in favor of big pharmaceutical companies. It is estimated that 3/4 of the funding for COVID vaccine research comes from public investment, but it is only big pharmaceutical which is operating as an economic cartel that benefits from the investment.
Intellectual property rights means that pharmaceutical companies maintain exclusive and absolute control over production, distribution, and market pricing.
For Argentine scientists, given the situation that humanity is facing, it is inconceivable to wait the 20 years required for the expiration of patents on vaccines against COVID-19.
A waiver within the World Trade Organization will allow all countries not to have to comply with patents in their national territory, but countries, their governments, can also release the patents to produce the vaccine locally if they have the productive capacity to do so. And there are already several organizations worldwide that we are cooperating to denounce the dangers of marginalizing the countries of the South in the access to vaccines.
More and more governments, voices and sectors of the world are making the same demand.
Several intellectuals such as Silvia Rodriguez, Dilma Rousseff, Piedad Córdoba, Atilio Borón, and so many others. The purpose of this campaign is to make visible that there are countries that concentrate the largest amount of vaccines produced and others that have not yet received anything, and it is sense to push, accompany and strengthen the initiative of some states to suspend, at least for the duration of the pandemic, the intellectual property rights of vaccines and medicines.
The global crisis is so deep and the pandemic so uncontrollable that even the United States and the European Union have now agreed to lift patent protections. Although this is not enough to make it a reality, since it will be the pharmaceutical corporations who will make the final decision.
Carolina Silvestre, TeleSUR, Buenos Aires.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss and thank you for watching.